Hey there everyone, this is Samuel Johnson and welcome back to the Spider-Verse Retrospectives. Today we'll be continuing our look at the lead-ins for the main Spider-Verse storyline as we take a look at the Superior Spider-Man number 32. And as I mentioned on Saturday, this is probably hands down one of my favorite iterations of the Web Slinger. Not my favorite, but honestly pretty up there. And a big reason for that is, well, his dual identity. Because while technically speaking, he is Peter Parker, he also isn't. And to kind of explain that, we kind of need to talk about the final storyline in the original run of The Amazing Spider-Man. Specifically, I think it was called Last Wish, I think. Pretty much what had happened in that storyline was that one of Spidey's biggest enemies, Otto Octavius, aka Dr. Octopus, was dying. And the reason for that was because, well, he was just old. His body was sickly, he was decrepit, and he could barely do anything, and so, well, the Grim Reaper was just around the corner, and he knew it. As such, to try and prolong his life, he decided to play a trick on the web slinger, and what he did was, well, he tricked him into swapping bodies with him. So Peter wound up in his aging, decrepit, dying body, while he wound up in Peter's younger, stronger body. So, yeah, that was a thing. Of course, while Peter did work to try and undo the switch, unfortunately, he did end up dying in Otto's body. However, before he died, he did manage to transfer his memories into Otto's mind. And doing this, he caused Otto to relive some of the more defining moments of his history, i.e., living with Aunt May and Uncle Ben, forming his morals, the death of his loved ones, and of course the mantra of with great power there must also come great responsibility. And as a result of this, Otto grew a conscience. And so when Peter wound up dying in his arms, Otto decided that he would not only try to live up to Peter's memory, but also surpass it as a superior Spider-Man. Which is where the Superior Spider-Man comes in, because for a time in the Marvel Universe, Otto was Spider-Man, and he even wound up getting a solo book stating as much. And as such, just for 2 years, Otto pretty much ran around the Marvel Universe claiming he was the Webhead. And it wasn't meant to be like a trick or anything. He wasn't trying to like drag Spider-Man's name through the mud or try and turn him into a criminal. No. He meant what he said. He actually did try, and he actually put himself into the role of Spider-Man, actually doing his best to help people when he could, fighting criminals, saving lives. Sorry, puppy here. And so, as a result of that, excuse me one sec. Sorry about that. But anyway, like I said, he really was trying to put his best foot forward and actually wanted to try and do some good. Mind you, it was still Otto Octavius, so while he was genuinely putting in an effort to actually be a good Spider-Man, he was still an arrogant dickwad, and as a result, he tended to still have a high opinion of himself, look down on others, and ultimately, because he was a former villain trying to play a hero, some of his methods were a bit morally dubious. However, what ultimately made the Superior Spider-Man work, at least for me, was that it was ultimately a story of redemption. Otto Octavius, as you know, is Doc Ock, one of Spidey's big bads, one of the biggest threats in the Marvel Universe. And this is now him in the role of his greatest enemy and not trying to mess it up. He's not trying to make Spider-Man the bad guy. He's not trying to turn public perception of Spider-Man negative, or more negative in this case. He's actually trying to put his best foot forward and say, I want to help people. And that's what happened in his book. He genuinely tried to help others, not because he wanted the fame or glory, though he wasn't against that, but because he wanted to genuinely help people, to showcase he was a superior Spider-Man. And even in some cases, he had his own reasons for fighting criminals and so forth. It was actually a really interesting story, and I enjoyed it. I haven't read the entire run, sadly, as I only go on up to volume 4 in the trades, but it is something I do want to actively complete my collection of one day. However, and at the end of the day, it didn't stay that way. Of course, status quo is God in comics. So eventually Peter did come back during a whole storyline where the Green Goblin was building an army right under Otto's nose, and when Otto realized his methods failed and that New York was almost doomed, he intentionally put Peter back in the driver's seat, even stating he was the superior Spider-Man. But honestly, I think even that is a great sign of how Otto's story went, as he willingly let himself step aside so that the real Spider-Man could come back. So I like that. And as a result, the Superior Spider-Man is just honestly one of my favorite incarnations, because at its core, it's the story of a bad person trying to turn his life around and do good. And for a time when Otto was Spidey, he did try that. Even in his life as Peter Parker, he actually did try to put his best foot forward. He even trying to get Peter a doctorate, even though it was more for his sake than Peter's. And in that time, he even wound up meeting a girl named Anna Maria Marsoni that he wound up forming a relationship with. And even when he got his doctorate, he wound up forming his own company, which Peter inherited when he got his body back. So that's a plus. So it's an interesting story. I do want to collect it all one day, but for now, we're more interested in where he fits into Spider-Verse. And in order to understand that, we need to go back to the Superior Spider-Man books, because during the Superior Spider-Man run, there was a time when he was knocked out of time, as during a whole storyline involving time travel shenanigans with the Spider-Man of 2099 getting sent back to the past to make sure the timeline was stable, and this dickwad named Tiberius Stone screwing with this lab that Peter worked at called Horizon Labs. Well, during that time, he wound up sabotaging this chronal device that Horizon Labs was working on, and while Otto tried to do his best to try and fix it, sadly, because of some events that happened earlier in the book where he purged Peter's memories, he couldn't work on it, so he tried his best to contain the temporal implosion, which he managed to do, but ultimately he was caught at ground zero. And so while he did save the city, Horizon Labs and subsequently him were lost. Now, ultimately, he was brought back, as they did manage to pull him back into the main timeline, but it was clear that before they pulled him back, he was doing something. But when questioned about it, he didn't remember what. And for the remainder of the Superior Spider-Man story, what had happened between when he got knocked out of time and when he was brought back is a mystery. As like I said, even he didn't remember that time. Well, that's where issue 32 comes in. As it turns out, when Otto got knocked out of time, he wound up in the year 2099, as in his own words, nature abhors a vacuum, and since 2099 lost its Spider-Man, Otto was sent in to replace him. As such, the instant Otto landed in 2099, his first priority was to try and find a way back to the present. Of course, he's still Spider-Man, so when he starts swinging around, he ends up getting the attention of the police of 2099, which is supposed to be a public security firm called the Public Eye. And, well, Otto, not being one to shy away from a fight, just knocks him out of the sky and causes them to retreat. Although it's clear that they are going to come back with bigger guns, so to speak, which Otto ends up learning from an unexpected ally the brother of Spider-Man 2099, Gabriel O'Hara, who does recognize Otto, or more specifically Peter, from the last time that Spider-Man and he crossed paths in a one-shot called Spider-Man Meets Spider-Man 2099. Look it up; it's an interesting story. Like it was the first appearance of Spider-Man 2211, but that's it again, different story altogether. Either way, while Otto, of course, doesn't remember that because he got rid of Peter's memories, he still tries to keep up the act that he's the main Spider-Man, and Gabe does ask him about, and so he does start probing Gabe for questions, and likewise Gabe probes him, because, well, Miguel, because of the whole time traveling, or Spider-Man 2099, whose real name is Miguel, I'll get to him when I get to him, because trust me, it's important. Gabe starts asking about questions about his brother, where he is, and if this is another switch like the last time that happened. And essentially, Otto pretty much doesn't really have any answers, and even claims that he's just as much a victim of this as Gabe's brother is. And so to try and kind of get the heat off them and go somewhere safe, Gabriel takes Otto to his brother's apartment, which I'm just gonna say this right now. His Spider-Man 2099's civilian name is Miguel. Throwing that out there now, so I don't have to keep dancing around it. As they end up going back to Miguel's apartment, where they meet the holographic interface for it. It was originally based on Marilyn Monroe, but Miguel wound up downloading that one into and downloaded that one into like a personal wrist device that he took back with him to the present. And so the holographic interface is the default. As such, with access to the holographic assistant, Otto ends up telling Gabe that he thinks he has everything he needs here, and that he thinks Gabe should leave because if he knows what he's going to do next, it could cause a time paradox, which I think is really just Otto trying to get him out of here so he doesn't have to keep dealing with him. And so after Gabe is gone, Otto begins immediately trying to get access to technology to allow him to facilitate a travel back to the present, which does direct him towards companies like Stark Fujikawa, or towards companies like Alchemax, which is basically a rebranded Oscorp of the future, and another company called Stark Fujikawa, as both of them have access to temporal technology, one of which actually was the focal point of the Spider-Man meets Spider-Man 2089 story, and thus they can easily be useful for trans-dimensional/time travel. As such, we get a little montage of Otto breaking into Stark Fujikawa labs and Alchemax labs, and even clashing with their security, which in this case include the supervillains called the Specialist, working for Stark Fujikawa, and Venture, who is a literal cyborg bounty hunter, and that's awesome, for working for Alchemax. But ultimately, Otto managed to get all the materials he needs, and does manage to build a temporal device, which he hopes will send him back to the present day. However, in the time that he's worked on it, he's also made some adjustments to the Holo program, and he's now made it match to look like Anna Maria Marsoni, which I think is kind of cute, because when it gets perfect, you can just see the look of longing on his face when he sees her. But this just kind of further provokes him into thinking, okay, I just got to get home now. And as such, he activates the device, and though to be safe, he does have something called a snapback protocol in his, which will essentially on his command, the Anna Maria hologram, or I'm just going to call you know what, I don't know what to call it. I'm just going to keep calling it a hologram until something better comes up. He pretty much just tells the Holo assistant that if he that pretty much the snapback protocol will bring him back to 2099 if things go awry when they try to jump back to the present. And so as such, with that working functionally, he activates the portal and he jumps through to hopefully what he thinks will be the present day Marvel universe. And when he arrives, that's what it seems to look like, until he sees the remains of one of the buildings, and showcasing that there was clearly a great battle that shortly happened just before he arrived. As such, Otto goes in to investigate, and in the midst of the rubble, he finds the bodies of Reed Richards, the Human Torch, and the Thing. As while he does believe that whatever this is was a result of Reed Richards' arrogance, well, if something was able to take him out, it must be a serious problem. However, the Anna Maria hologram ends up stating that it senses strange, unique energies from a pile of rubble to the side. And when Otto goes to investigate, he finds the body of Spider-Man, or more specifically, a Spider-Man with a 5 on his chest and two puncture wounds. As such, Otto's able to determine that this is not his reality. That this is a reality where Spider-Man joined the Fantastic Five, which is actually an issue of What If, and probably one of its most famous stories, especially since it was the first issue of What If. And so Otto, just kind of writing all this off, decides that, well, this isn't his world, not his problem. So he activates a snapback protocol and goes back to 2089, hoping to try again. Unfortunately for Otto, every time he keeps trying to use the device, he ends up just jumping into the present days of other parallel universes, specifically House of M, a world still set in Civil War, and another that seems to be somewhat futuristic, and where that world Spider-Man is still wearing the Mark I spider armor. While this would naturally be annoying in its own right, the weird thing between all three of these universes is that when Otto arrives in them, he finds each of these worlds Spider-Men are dead, all having sustained the same puncture wounds as the Fantastic Five Spidey, and all of their bodies seemingly radiating with unique energies that don't belong in any of the universes they visited. As such, Otto's main concern stops going from needing to find a way home to trying to figure out what the hell's going on, because if these various Spider-Men are all being killed by the same thing, this is a problem. This could be a problem, put simply. And as such, Otto decides that he needs to further investigate this, because if this is going to be an issue, then it needs to be taken care of right away before he gets home. And sure enough, as he comes to that conclusion, we then cut to another parallel universe as we see that world Spider-Man duking it out with the Killer. And in the case of the Spider-Man, this Spidey is Spider-Man India, who Put simply, as you can tell by the title, is just a version of Spider-Man whose setting is in India. His pretty much just the whole gimmick with him is just that the tale of Spider-Man in this world is set more in Indian motifs and mythology rather than in New York. As such, while instead of this world Spidey being Peter Parker, his name's Pavder Prabhakar. I apologize if I'm mispronouncing that. He was raised by his Aunt Maya and Uncle Bim. Instead of getting his powers from a radioactive spider bite, he was given them by a mystical yogi. And his villains are actually derived from a demonic amulet that ends up imbuing whoever wields it with demonic energies, which resulted in the creation of this world's Green Goblin on Doc Ock, and kind of sort of Venom. I'll talk about that later. But ultimately, India is just kind of one of those stories that I think might be a little overhyped, but I do think it's worth checking out. And like with 1602, I did check it out after reading the story, and I especially loved it. And I think it is worth checking out just for the idea alone. And I love the artwork. The artwork is amazing. Especially love the design for Doc Ock. Seriously, look it up. It's awesome. But I'm getting off topic. The point is, young Mr. Prabhakar is actually dealing with the thing that Otto is tracking. Specifically, Karn of the Inheritors, straight from Edge of Spider-Verse #1, who is, he's responsible for the death of those other Spideys, and he's currently planning to make Pavder Prabhakar his next target. And while the young Mr. Prabhakar is able to successfully dodge all of Karn's attacks, sadly, when Karn ends up throwing a spear right into a building, which almost causes the structure to collapse onto a bunch of civilians. Hold on one sec. Sorry about that. Anyway, like I said, Karn ends up throwing a spear into a building, which nearly causes it to fall on a bunch of civilians. While Prabhakar is able to use his webbing to hold the building back and stop it and give the people enough time to run away, sadly, this also leaves him open to attack as Karn managed to go in for a spear. And he gets ready to go. And as Karn gets ready to go in for the kill, Thankfully, though, Pavter is saved at the last second as a portal opens up behind Karn. And from the portal comes the superior Spider-Man, who delivers a flying kick right to Karn's face, throwing him into a building. As such, with the people out of the way and Karn gone, Pavter is able to let go of the building, and Otto pretty much tells him that they need to get out of here. While Pavter thinks that they'll be able to take Karn that together they may be able to take Karn, Otto lets him know that they cannot. That if they stay here and try to fight him like this, they will most likely die, and basically the best option right now is to just get into the portal because the Karn is only hunting after spider people, and if Pavter jumps through them, he'll leave this place alone. And as such, Pavter ends up jumping through the portal as well, and once they go, Karn ends up getting back up, and sure enough, once he realizes there are no more Spideys here, he just ditches this universe. As such, as Otto and Pavter are traveling between worlds, Otto does give the lowdown on what's going on, that he's recruiting an army of Spider-Men to take Karn down, and he wants Pavter to join him. And Pavter actually happily, and that's part of the reason why Pavter jumped in at all, as his Aunt Maya didn't raise a fool, and so as they're flying through the portals, Pavter says it'll be an honor to serve and to be the first in what he hopes to be a large army. And once Otto hears this, he says, "First? What makes you think you're the first?" And as such, once Otto and Pavter arrive back in 29, we get a nice 2-page spread as we see the team of Spideys that Otto had assembled at the end of Edge of Spider-Verse #1, now including Spider-Man Noir and now Spider-Man India. So it's actually just a really cool scene, so I dig it. Really nice. It's just a nice thing to end the story on, which, yeah, that's the end of the initial story. But this comic actually has a backup story that actually kind of explains how Otto recruited another Spider-Man in this group, specifically the Assassin Spider-Man. And I suppose I should probably get into his backstory too, since the backup story does kind of go into his deal. Put simply, Assassin Spider-Man is like with other Spidey, like with the Fantastic Five Spider-Man, actually from an issue of What If. Specifically, a what if for the famous Marvel one-shot Spider-Man vs. Wolverine. Now, I have not read Spider-Man vs. Wolverine, but I am familiar with the basic premise, and pretty much in the story, Spider-Man wound up going. Spider-Man and Wolverine were in Russia doing various things. Again, haven't read the story, so I don't know all the details. But the crux of the story was that an old flame of Wolverines was being hunted by the KGB, And, well, she knew that as long as she was alive, the KGB would not stop hunting her. As such, she wanted Wolverine to pretty much give her a quick death so she wouldn't suffer, but Spider-Man, not knowing the details, wound up stopping Wolverine, which prompted them to get into a fight. And while they were fighting, the KGB showed up and caused things to get complicated, but in the midst of the fight, well, Wolverine's old flame wound up tricking Spider-Man into pretty much decking her with a no holds barred spider punch, which wound up killing her exactly as she wanted. As such, the aftermath of the story was that while Peter did feel guilty for this and the hand he played in it, he was able to go back to New York and mend and heal and eventually move on. However, in the world of Assassin Spider-Man, just before he could go back to the US, Wolverine wound up heading him off at the airport and let him know that his girlfriend actually had a sister, a girl named Alex, who the KGB were holding captive. And Peter, still feeling guilt for what he had done to Alex's sister, decided to stick around and help Wolverine free her, which ultimately they did. But once they freed her, well, he continued to stick around and he helped the pair out. And pretty much they wound up forming a trio of, I'm just going to say, assassins. And while in the beginning Peter did try to stick close to his moral code, well, over time that moral code did begin to degrade, especially as they continued dealing with more KGB assassins who were after Alex. However, in that same time, Peter was also wound up gaining training, and from this training he wound up improving his skills, becoming more adept, a better fighter. His spider sense was even augmented to the point where he could just know things before they actually happened. It was actually a really interesting take, and ultimately it turned the friendly neighborhood Spider-Man we're all familiar with into a more serious and more laser-focused Spider-Man who was a lot more willing to kill, to the point where he even modified his web shooters so that they actually shot bullets. So it was an interesting idea. It was an interesting story, and quite frankly, one of the things that I love about the story is Assassin Spider-Man's costume, which let me see if I can find it here, because here, let me see if I can find it. Yeah, this is Assassin Spider-Man, and I kind of like this costume because it looks like it actually is a Black Ops version of a Spidey costume. Pretty much having the enough motifs of the original Spider-Man outfit while still looking more like for stealth and for missions and so forth. And so pretty much from that issue what it forward, that Assassin Spider-Man was born, and Wolverine and Alex became their own little team, operating out of a mansion in Russia and taking any missions that were given to them. Of course, of course, they're not the bad guys. They still hunt. They still fight evil, but again, looser moral code. However, that's where this story comes in, the Spider Sanction, as it actually opens with Karn arriving in their mansion and, well, vaporizing Wolverine. Yeah, he manages to stab Wolverine with his spear, and he completely atomizes his body to the point where the only thing left is his adamantium skeleton. And so Peter, realizing that this guy is a problem, well, hold on one second again. Again, sorry about that. But anyway, as I was saying, pretty much Peter realizes that Karn is kind of a problem, especially since if he was able to kill Wolverine, then yeah, it's probably best to take this fight somewhere else, especially since Alex is trying to offer support, and since Wolverine was a mutant was a super strong mutant with a healing factor, and Spidey is a guy with spider powers, odds are a normal person like Alex, even with all her training, is probably not going to stand a chance against Karn. And as such, while she does tell Peter that she'll provide covering fire while he gets a rocket launcher, he ends up shooting a web ball at her head and knocking her out before taking the fight outside the manor, with Karn following after. And this actually is this little bit that I do think works, because it showcases Peter acting strategically and trying to use his mind to take Karn down. And how he does this is that he takes advantage of Karn essentially zeroing in on him, since Peter seems to be the only one he's interested in. Well, aside from Wolverine, who he probably killed because he was in his way. But the thing is, well, the generator for that mansion is not just a standard oil generator. It's apparently something of Shire technology, and is apparently so powerful that it could power a whole city. And the thing is, I mentioned before in Edge of Spider-Verse #1 how Karn's spear was a double-pronged laser spear. So what happens when you take a laser spear and jam it into a generator that's so powerful that it could light an entire city? And sure enough, Peter tests that theory as he jumps onto the generator, and as Karn goes in to try and stab him, he jumps out of the way, and Karn gets hit with thousands of volts of electricity. How unfortunately, though, this doesn't seem to phase Karn at all. And while Peter is ready to try and go in for a second strategy, well, Karn backhands him into a cliff, just claiming that Peter has amused him and that it's the end of the road. As such, he asks Peter to give his last words, and Peter's last words are timber, which does kind of lead to a funny moment where Karn says, "An odd epitaph, but to each their own." But sure enough, we soon see why he said that, as immediately a web line comes out of nowhere, pulls down a little log, and manages to hit Karn, and manages to smack Karn, causing him to fall down the hill they're on. And sure enough, we soon see who Peter's aide was, the Superior Spider-Man, who immediately comes in upside down. As while Assassin Spidey wants to immediately go after Karn, Otto pretty much stops him. While Assassin Spidey thinks it's because, well, moral conundrum or whatever. No, it's because, again, they can't do it himself. Well, he has no problem with the deed. Well, he has no problem with wanting to kill with killing Karn. He tells his assassin counterpart, or more specifically the assassin Peter, that, well, they cannot face him on their own, and that if they want a chance at beating him, they need to band together, especially since he believes that there are other Spideys in the multiverse who, while not as pragmatic as Otto or this version of Peter, do contain certain skills that might be useful to them. As such, again, Assassin Spidey gives the whole spiel of what about Alex? Otto tells him that he's only interested in spiders, and that if he wants to go with him, be his guest, and that he promises they will kill Karn. And so Assassin Spidey says Otto can count him in, and so Otto ends up opening a portal and they jump through, which is where the comic ends. So, all right, first story. I think the first story is pretty good. Once more, it's a nice little lead-in into the events, while also, well, this one being definitely grounded in the ongoing story with the Superior Spider-Man. Admittedly, this was actually my first, like with 1602 Spider-Man, this was my first exposure to the Superior Spider-Man. I had heard of the character before this, and while he was on my to-read list, it wasn't until this storyline that I finally got a chance to read stuff about him. And quite frankly, I thought, based on what I had heard about the character and how things went down, it was pretty cool to actually see him in action, as I liked how he was written as Otto in Spider-Man's body, as we did kind of see his thought process and how kind of arrogant he is, how he scoffed at things, but once again, how he was trying to put his best foot forward and try and think things through. Admittedly, it was a little fast-paced in the comic when Otto was in 2099 and gathering the resources, but quite frankly, considering that this is supposed to be a lead into Spider-Verse and that the main storyline is supposed to be the whole Inheritors thing, it kind of makes sense. Well, the 2099 thing could be a story in and of itself. We've kind of sort of seen that with the aforementioned Spider-Man 2099 meets Spider-Man storyline. And I actually do recommend looking that up. It's a pretty good story. But essentially, while that part is rushed, at the very least, it's just there to act as, well, the lead-in. And I think it does a good job at kind of speeding things along and without making you feel bored. As the action is pretty cool, seeing Otto swinging around, getting the technology, evading Alchemax, and so forth. And at the same time, when it actually does get to the parts that are important to Spider-Verse, it's actually pretty nice, especially as you see Otto putting the pieces together, like when he tries going back in time and he ends up in the Fantastic Five universe, and he sees that world's Fantastic Five dead. At first, he just kind of writes it off as like, not my world, not my problem. But then when he starts noticing patterns between other universes, that's when he starts realizing, okay, this might be something I need to take care of. And I do kind of like how he puts the pieces together, that he knows his commonalities between these worlds, and because of his scientific knowledge and the Hollow Anna, he's able to figure out that there is a connection between these things, which ultimately links him to finding Karn, and which from there, that's how he starts recruiting his spider team. Which again, the stuff with the Spider-Man India clearly happens after the events of Edge of Spider-Verse #1, as, like I said, we saw the Spider team from there, which, if you need a reminder, included the Assassin Spider-Man, Ashley Barton from the Old Man Logan universe, Six-Armed Spider-Man, Spider-Monkey, and now Spider-Man Noir. So that's a nice little team, which I think is pretty cool, and seeing them all come and seeing the final shot, seeing all those Spideys in the same room together was It's awesome. It's just awesome. Just like with Edge Into the Spider-Verse, when you see all these Spideys together in the same room ready to kick ass, it's just flippin' cool. I don't care that the one that brought them together is Otto Octavius. This is still really damn awesome, and you cannot tell me otherwise. So kind of seeing the build up to that, seeing Otto put the pieces together, and then finally decide, okay, I need to do something about this, which leads to him forming his own spider army. I think it's good and works as a good lead in. And as for the Spider Sanction storyline with Assassin Spider-Man, once again, like with the Edge of Spider-Verse stories, it's a nice little kind of window into his world that showcases how he got pulled into all this. And it's essentially just Karn came in, attacked him and his crew, ultimately the superior Spider-Man had to come in and save his hide. Again, what makes me appreciate that story though is that prior to reading Spider-Verse, I actually did read that issue of What If. I actually had heard about Assassin Spider-Man through a top 10 darkest versions or craziest versions of Spider-Man thing. I wound up looking up the one shot, thought it sounded pretty interesting, and I wound up getting it. So seeing that Spider-Man get some more focus in the story, I thought was pretty cool. Especially like that we do kind of see more of how he operates on a solo gig, because kind of going back to that issue of What If, essentially we kind of got a drive-by version of his whole story, with us ultimately popping back into Assassin Spider-Man once his training was done and his moral compass had already been been put askew. So at that point, we just kind of saw. So it's kind of nice seeing into his head in this story and in the Spider Sanction story, and seeing him as a main character and how he kind of thinks things through. Which I admit, I thought was pretty cool. I thought it was really nice how he was still paying attention. How he directed the fight outside because he realized Karn was a big problem because he took out Wolverine. How he utilized little things he noticed to try and work things to advantage. Like when he realized Karn was only focused on him, and well, there's the generator. It's again smart thinking that does let him think outside the box, and of course because he's the assassin Spider-Man, he's more willing to kill, and thus the whole generator plan, well, that was his attempt to try and get rid of Karn, and that also showcases Karn's limits, because again it did nothing, which I'm just gonna dance around the issue for now, because this is a thing with the Inheritors, which I'll bring up probably in the next issue, but put simply, they are hard to take down. I did mention back when I just Spider-Verse number 3 that when Spidey fought Morlun, apparently he only won by the skin of his teeth, and well, you'll see when I get to it, but put simply, it will be something I discuss. But either way, it does still set a standard for Karn and how much of a big threat he is. But overall, it's just a nice little story. It's just a nice little story that showcases how Otto wound up recruiting Assassin Spidey into his team. So overall, it's pretty good. So overall, the main storyline I think is pretty cool. Nice little lead into and that helps set up how Otto got involved in all this, as well as showcasing what he was doing when that whole time gap. I like seeing him ultimately figure things out and start forming a spider team is really cool, especially with the final shot when we see the team of assorted Spideys he's already assembled, and the backup story with Assassin Spider-Man. I think was a nice little thing to help showcase more of his character, kind of get some nice little focus on him, as well as showcasing and just kind of overall being a nice little way of showcasing how Otto recruited him into his team. So overall good issue. So yeah, I think that's about it. Thank you for watching. I'm Samuel Johnson, and tune in Thursday when we look at the next issue of Superior Spider-Man and see just how successful Otto's superior spider army is in taking down Karn. So till then, hope you have a good night, and well, take care.